Tonight I'll be reading to you a selection from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Book 3, The Return of the King, Part 6, from Chapter 3. The theme of this reading is the power of friendship and brotherhood. Now at last they turned their faces to the mountain and set out, thinking no more of concealment, bending their weariness and failing wills only to the one task of going on. In the dimness of its dreary day, few things even in that land of vigilance could have espied them, save from the close at hand. Of all the slaves of the Dark Lord, only the Nazgul could have warned him of the peril that crept, small but indomitable, into the very heart of his guarded realm. But the Nazgul and their black wings were abroad on another errand. They were gathered far away, shadowing the march of the captains of the West, and thither the thought of the Dark Tower was turned. That day it seemed to Sam that his master had found some new strength, more than could be explained by the small lightening of the load that he had to carry. In the first marches they went further and faster than he had hoped. The land was rough and hostile, yet they made much progress, and ever the mountain drew nearer. But as the day wore on, and all too soon the dim light began to fail, Frodo stopped again, and began to stagger, as if the renewed effort had squandered his remaining strength. At last, the halt, he sank down and said, "I'm thirsty, Sam," and did not speak again. Sam gave him a mouthful of water. Only one more mouthful remained. He went without himself, and now, as once more the night of Mordor closed over them, through all his thoughts there came the memory of water, and every brook and stream or fount that he'd ever seen under green willow shades or twinkling in the sun. They danced and rippled for his torment behind the blindness of his eyes. He felt the cool mud about his toes as he paddled in the pool at Bywater with Jolly Cotton and Tom and Nibs and their sister Rosie. But that was years ago, he sighed, and far away. Way back, if there is one, goes back past the mountain. He could not sleep, and he held a debate with himself. "Well, come now. We've done better than you hoped," he said sturdily. "Began well, anyway. I reckon we crossed half the distance before we stopped. One more day will do it." And then he paused. "Don't be a fool, Sam Gamgee," came an answer in his own voice. "He won't go another day like that. If he moves at all, and you can't go on much longer giving him all the water and most of the food. I can go on a good way, though, and I will." "Where to?" "To the mountain, of course." "But what then, Sam Gamgee? What then? When you get there, what are you going to do? He won't be able to do anything for himself." To his dismay, Sam realized that he'd not got an answer to this. He had no clear idea at all. Frodo had not spoken much to him of this errand, and Sam only knew vaguely that the ring had somehow to be put in the fire. "The cracks of doom," he muttered, the old name rising to his mind. "Well, if Master knows how to find them, I don't." "There you are," came the answer. "It's all quite useless," he said to himself. "You are the fool, going on and hoping and toiling. You could have lain down and gone to sleep together days ago if you hadn't been so dogged. But you'll die just the same or worse. You might as well just lie down now and give it up. You'll never get to the top anyway." "I'll get there if I leave everything but my bones behind," said Sam. "And I'll carry Mr. Frodo up myself if it breaks my back and my heart. So stop arguing." At that moment, Sam felt a tremor in the ground beneath him, and he heard or sensed a deep remote rumble, as of thunder imprisoned under the earth. There was a brief red flame that flickered under the clouds and died away. The mountain, too, slept uneasily. The last stage of their journey to Orodruin came. It was a torment greater than Sam had ever thought he could bear. He was in pain, and so parched he could no longer swallow even a mouthful of food. It remained dark, not only because of the smokes of the mountain. There seemed to be a storm coming up, and away to the southeast there was a shimmer of lightnings under the black skies. Worst of all, the air was full of fumes. Breathing was painful and difficult, and a dizziness came on them so that they staggered and fell often, and yet their wills did not yield, and they struggled on. The mountain crept up, ever nearer until, if they lifted their heavy heads, it filled all their sight. Looming vast before them, a huge mass of ash and slag and burned stone, out of which a sheer-sided cone was raised into the clouds. Before the day-long dusk ended and true night came again, they had crawled and stumbled to its very feet. With a gasp, Frodo cast himself on the ground, sat by him. To his surprise, he felt tired, but lighter, and his head seemed clear again. No more debates disturbed his mind. He knew all the arguments of despair and would not listen to them. His will was set, and only death would break it. He felt no longer either desire or need of sleep, but rather of watchfulness. He knew all the hazards and perils were now drawing together to a point. The next day would be a day of doom, the day of final effort or disaster, the last gasp. But when would it come? The night seemed endless and timeless, minute after minute falling dead and adding up to no passing hour, bringing no change. And Sam began to wonder if a second darkness had begun, and no day would. At last he groped for Frodo's hand. It was cold and trembling. His master was shivering. "I didn't ought to have left my blanket behind," muttered Sam, and lying down he tried to comfort Frodo with his arms and his body. Then sleep took him, and the dim light of the last day of their quest found them side by side. The wind had fallen the day before as it shifted from the west, and now it came from the north and began to rise. And slowly the light of the unseen sun filtered down into the shadows where the hobbits lay. "Now for it, the last gasp," said Sam as he struggled to his feet. He bent over Frodo, rousing him gently. Frodo groaned, but with a great effort of will he staggered up. Then he fell upon his knees again. He raised his eyes with difficulty to the dark slopes of Mount Doom towering above him, and then pitifully he began to crawl forward on his hands. Sam looked at him, and he wept in his heart. But no tears came to his dry and stinging eyes. "I said I'd carry him if it broke my back," he muttered, "and I will. Come, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you and it as well. So up you get. Come on, Mr. Frodo, dear. Sam will give you a ride. Just tell him where to go, and he'll go." As Frodo clung upon his back, arms loosely about his neck, legs clasped firmly under his arms, Sam staggered to his feet. And then, to his amazement, he felt the burden light. He had feared that he would barely strength to lift his master alone, and beyond that he'd expected to share in the dreadful dragging weight of the accursed ring. But it was not so. Whether because Frodo was so worn by his long pains, wound of knife, and venomous sting, and sorrow, fear, and homeless wandering, or because of some gift of final strength was given to him, Sam lifted Frodo with no more difficulty than if he were carrying a hobbit child piggyback in some romp on the lawns or the hayfields of the Shire. He took a deep breath and started off. They had reached the mountain's foot on its northern side and a little to the westward. There its long gray slopes, though broken, were not sheer. Frodo did not speak, and so Sam struggled on as best he could, having no guidance but the will to climb as high as he might be before his strength gave out and his will broke. On he toiled, up and up, turning this way and that to lessen the slope, often stumbling forward, and at the last crawling like a snail with a heavy burden on its back. When his will could drive him no further, his limbs gave way. He stopped. He laid his master gently down. Frodo opened his eyes and drew a breath. It was easier to breathe up here above the reeks that coiled and drifted down below. "Thank you, Sam," he said in a cracked whisper. "How far is there to go?"